So for the database to work, we have identified here the different tables that we will have in our database. So to illustrate what tables are, you can consider them as objects. For example, in our case, we have users. So each row of our database will be one user. So users is one of the objects of our app, but we will also have a list of vendors. And then we'll also be able to create connections between objects. So we can actually define that this user is assigned to this vendor, so one of the companies that provide their services to your business. And in the same way, we will be able to link documents and vendors, or invoices and vendors, or tasks and users to, for example, know who has been assigned to each of the tasks, so that the vendors, if they are a team of, let's say, 4 people to log into the app, they can also assign the different tasks to their team. So I always recommend to get started by mapping the tables you will need in such a format, for example, so you have a good clarity of what you will have to build, but also start thinking, okay, what will be the different properties for each of these tables that will qualify these objects. So to take the example of users, we will probably have a field for their email, but also a field for their name. Whereas for invoices, you will have the title of the invoice, you'll have a file type of field where you will be able to attach the actual document, maybe a PDF. You'll also have a number field, which will be the amount of the invoice, but also, for example, a status to know whether this invoice has been paid already or not. And these objects, we will be creating them as tables right now in Softr databases. Now I'm here in the dashboard of my Softr account, and I will actually go ahead and create here an app from scratch. So we see that we have the 3 components of our app available here. And I will be creating an app from scratch, and that's where I can decide what data to connect to my app, because I could be having my data in a Google Sheet or Notion or even any REST API, and Softr would be able to connect the interface components. For example, a calendar, if you have records in a Notion table, you will be able to display this into a calendar block in Softr. In our case, we'll be using Softr databases. They're the native database that Softr provides, and you get the best performance with that. And it's also directly included within Softr. But whenever you have data somewhere else, you can also easily connect to those other tools. So I'll be continuing with that. It will create an app with already actually some elements, like for example, some utility pages, and we see already there 2 blocks being created, and we will just click on this dynamic block and see that the first step you need to take when you have a block is actually to connect it to a source, and that's where I'll just hit create new database, and it will create a new database from scratch, and that will be our database. So we'll be renaming the app and give the same name to our database, because in our case, we'll have one app for one database, but you could also have one database that you connect to different apps if they need to share the same set of data. Perfect. Now I will have to create the different objects that we had here as tables. So we see here, table 1, we'll get started with the users table. I usually do that because all of my apps have users, and we'll be able to connect them properly to Softr user settings later. But right now we will design the database table for our users. So I'll be starting here with the first column here. So each column is a field that will enable to categorize a part of the data of this table. So as we see here, we have a select kind of field, so you can easily select, for example, a status for a project. But this is not our case. I'll be just removing these two columns, these 2 fields, and have actually my primary column. So the first column being the email, because here I recommend this primary column, this primary field, to always be as unique as possible. For example, a first name would not be a great choice because you might have 2 people called Jane, and whenever you'll want to filter on that or to search for Jane, then we'll see multiple results that will not help you to know who is whom. So email is a great unique identifier for companies, using a website is quite good. In some cases, you can also use a company name because it's also quite unique. For example, in your vendor ecosystem, there is a high chance that not two vendors, not two companies have the same name, but always think about having something as unique as possible. And that's where we'll be able to just add some data here, for example. And that's how we would have a first user with that email. I'll be adding another field that is a short text for, let's say, the full name. Perfect. And as we said here, we will have two user roles, and we will actually fit all our users within the same table. But the way to know if you are either an admin or a vendor, so working for one of these companies that you're working with, we'll actually be using here a select field that we call a role that will determine your role for later within the application. So I'm gonna name that one admin and here vendor. And that way, if I decide that Jeanne Dupont is an admin, later when we'll configure our users, we'll be able to create a user group and say, okay, you are an admin, like a user group is admin for everyone who has admin here as a role, and that's it. That way you don't have to create multiple tables, for example, here, one here for admin users and one for vendor users, because you definitely want to keep all your users in the same table. So now before creating any more field, and we'll have some other fields for user, I'll simply be creating all the tables that we need. So vendors, we had as well invoices, we had tasks, and I think documents. And I'm creating all the tables already because we'll need these tables to create what we call a related record. So that's a way to say a user here is, for example, related to a vendor. So if we already just add some names, so let's say we have a first vendor, we'll be able here, if I type related record, this is a type of field, and I'll call that works at assay. I can decide that this field is related to the table vendors, and we don't allow to link to multiple vendors because they always work for only one. And that way I can simply say, okay, this user, so that would be more for the case of a vendor because admins will not be assigned to any vendor in that way. But when I open this tab now, I see that I automatically have this mirrored field that is being created. And that way we really have this connection that exists. And I can, for example, right click here to add lookup fields, and I can be pulling data from that other table automatically so that, for example, we could have here first full names of the team. And if I link someone else, for example, Niels as a vendor as well for that same company, we'll have here automatically a list of all the first names because we are pulling automatically all the users that we have connected. So I'll remove this for now, but this is one of the most important principles in relational databases like Softr databases. Using related fields is the way to make your data structure as robust and scalable as possible. And it is way better, way more organized and structured than Excel because, for example, here in this column, it is only one of the different, so here, one of the two values, and you cannot end up with a date, for example, somehow for another record. Okay, so now looking back at my plan, I had already planned all the different fields for my tables, and I will be implementing that right now. So it's a good opportunity to go through the different field types. So for example, phone number, we have a native field for phone number, and yeah, which will automatically enable here for any country. But for example, in form later in your app, you can also make sure it validates that it's really the phone number format, We have the same for URLs, like there are multiple different native fields that will really make it easy for you to make this database scalable. So another one we'll add is the avatar, and for that we'll need a file. And basically, as we import a picture, we will be able to map that field to the avatar field of Softr so that they will see in their interface their little avatar icon, but we'll also be able to display it. Maybe if we have a list of all the users of a specific vendor, we'll be able to display that nicely. So I'm going to add all the remaining fields now. So I'm adding here a status for users, because in the app, the vendors will be able to invite their team members and will let an admin approve that so that we're maximizing the security of the app. So if you are in a pending state, your account is not active yet, and it will have to be approved by an admin. And from there, when this user will try to log in, they will be able to log in and give their email and maybe receive a one-time use code to access their account for the first time. And here, when configuring a select field, we can also be selecting specific colors for each of the values, for example, like this. And we'll be able to reflect them within the app so we can have color codes that make it easy to understand, for example, the status of one of the vendors. And we've got two types of text. One is a short text, for example, for a short address or a job title. And we've got long text, which will enable to store way more text, for example, for a vendor description here. So now where it gets really interesting is, let's say we have a select field like this for the different categories of vendors. We can be setting up an AI agent, and we'll be just describing this supplier, for example, and then we can, in category, activate the AI agents that will automatically fill the right category value based on the vendor description. So we can be adding a prompt right here, and we'll say the vendor category for this, and I will tag here the vendor description. And I will select a model. So for example, 4.1 menu, because this is quite a simple task. I could be allowing web search. For example, if I was looking for external information or something that's available online on a specific company. In our case, we'll be just basing that on the description that we provide. So no need for web search. And here we have some settings about when to run this AI agent. Should it be only triggered manually or whenever a new record is created? Or here, when an existing record is updated, and we could say that whenever the vendor description is updated, we can re-trigger that. So in our case, let's paste that into another line, and we'll see that it will automatically run whenever it is updated, or we could just in here manually trigger that, and it will go through the list of values that we made available here to actually automatically categorize. So this is called the database AI agent, and it really gives superpowers to your database because it can automatically, ongoingly work to maybe refine the data, clean it, but also enrich it, reformat it. And it's also able, if you have a field that is, for example, a PDF, it can also be answering or extracting elements from this PDF to store it, for example, in a text, or categorizing, or maybe extracting an amount from an invoice. And we'll very probably be doing that in here if it's useful. So you have AI living right into your database to improve the efficiency of this app. So I'll be now adding some date fields, because for this use case, we're tracking the journey from applying to become a vendor to actually being an approved vendor. And through this journey, you'll have to complete some tasks, upload documents, etc. So here we'll have the process start date. um, where we'll track the moment you entered this process. So for example, that day, and we'll be having the approval date. I can also just duplicate this field to replace the name and have approval date. And here we are having the second use of a related record because we'll be linking related documents and have them here. Perfect. So that's the way to create this connection between the vendor and all the documents that they have uploaded. And we'll be reusing that in the interface and in the app settings to make sure that the user only sees the vendor documents of the company where they work, so they don't see documents from other vendors, which is a security measure, but also making the app more relevant. So I did the same for tasks. Now I'm doing it for the invoices as well. And again, remember that every time I add a field like that, I will have the mirrored field being created here. And it's also important to, for example, rename them here to vendor or related vendor as you prefer, because they have been created automatically with this as a name for now. So you can go in there and improve that. So now I need to be adding a new field that is the number of open tasks. And actually, the way to know about that is to look into the related tasks, right? Because we have, let's say, 3 related tasks. I'll be just adding some. So I've just added 3 random tasks here, and we can give them a status: to do, in progress, done. And we'll basically, the way to count the number of open tasks would be to check for, so let's map them all to the same vendor. Okay, so we'll have to basically, for this vendor, count the number of tasks that are not done. But we want to have that at the vendor level here. So we can, if we have a detailed page that lists all the information we have about that vendor, we can directly display that information. So I'll be adding right here a rollup type of field that will be called number of open tasks. And I will select the related record field to pull that information from. So I'll be selecting tasks and I will be pulling the name, but it actually doesn't really matter because I'll be counting. Also, we have all kinds of formula to calculate or retrieve data from the related tasks in our case. And we'll add record options to actually filter and say, I only want the tasks that are done. So I can either create the condition myself and say the status is not done, but I could also be simply writing that with natural language to this AI helper and say tasks that aren't done. It will probably figure out, yeah, the right settings. So doing that, if I save it, we'll have actually 2 open tasks for our company Acme. And if we go in here, we see that it's actually the correct answer. If that one becomes done, we go back to 1. So this is the way rollup look. So we initially saw the rollups that can enable, for example, here to display all the statuses of the related tasks. But rollups are more related to running calculations, counting, etc. And in our case, it is very useful to see directly from this table the number of open tasks, even though tasks are being managed in another table. And we'll be applying the same logic for counting the total outstanding invoice for each of our vendors. And I'll be looking at invoices and we'll again be counting all the invoices for which the status is none of rejected and paid, which means that they're outstanding. And we have 1 in our case. Okay, and about the select fields, there is also something you need to know is that one select field can actually become a multi-select. So it will not be the case here for selecting the type of document because it's usually only one type, but that would be the way you can select multiple values of a select field. If not enabled, then whenever you pick another value, it will replace the previous one. And some other fields that are really useful to have are the created at. So using this, it will natively put a timestamp on the actual time this record was created. And there is another one called last updated at that actually does the same, but it will actually capture the timestamp of the last time you edited this field or only some of the fields that you select. And also to tell a word about why we're using a different table for invoices and for documents when actually invoices are documents, they are a PDF. Here it's really because we want to treat them as two different objects. So documents would be all the documentation that, for example, a company has to provide, maybe to explain their services, to check some legal concerns, etc., the contracts. But invoices are something we want to track in a very individual way because we'll, for example, be using them if I add this other field. So currency field, that would be the amount. Yeah, perfect. We will be able in our interface to show, for example, a chart that takes the amount as the unit and does maybe a sum of all the amounts for the different vendors that we have linked so we can know how much we paid to each of the vendors. And for example, amount is a property that the typical documents like contracts or descriptions of products and services will not have. And for this use case, because these two elements are very important but also very specific, I prefer to actually separate them in different tables and consider them different objects. So I'm now done creating the infrastructure, and what I need to be adding now is some data. I'll be adding some placeholder data to make this app look real, so we'll be able to start creating the interface on top of this data. Okay, so I've now added placeholder data to all these tabs in our database, and this will make it easier to build the app, but then also to convert it into a template that looks like an app you could directly reuse.